For 7 years, Kwon Ji-hoon had managed his wife, Min So-yeon, with the same detached precision he applied to his shipping manifests and his revenue projections. He had housed her, clothed her, and provided for her, ensuring the asset was maintained. It took precisely 72 hours for him to understand that in doing so, he had committed the single greatest error of his life. The error was not in the management, but in the category. He had managed a person he should have held. He saw the house, but not the foundation. The consequence was absolute. The house was now collapsing. The final confirmation of this fact came not from one of his own men, but from the old Oyabun of the Inagawa Kai, a man whose alliance was the bedrock of Ji-hoon's international legitimacy. The Oyabun's voice, raspy and ancient, had crackled over the secured line from Tokyo, heavy with a pity that was more insulting than any threat. 7 words, Kwon-chi, the old man had said, after informing Ji-hoon that their joint venture in the Vladivostok port was suspended indefinitely. Just 7 words your father told me about her, the day of your wedding. I did not understand them then. I do now. A pause, thick with the weight of decades. He said, "She is the only one who listens." And with that, the line had gone dead, leaving Ji-hoon standing in the sudden, suffocating silence of his penthouse office, the 7 words hanging in the air like an indictment. He was about to learn what it meant to lead an empire of the deaf, because the one person who truly heard anything was gone, and he was the one who had let her go. By the way, wherever in the world you're watching from right now, let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Okay, where were we? The chase had not yet begun. He did not yet know he was meant to chase anything at all. He only knew that the structure of his world, a world he had always believed he commanded through sheer will and meticulous design, was dissolving like salt in water. The quiet woman he had treated as a piece of elegant peripheral furniture had, it turned out, been the master architect of it all. And now she was gone, leaving behind nothing but the echo of her silence and a trail designed to teach him the full, ruinous cost of his blindness. 4 nights before the Oyabun's call, the world was still intact. It was polished to a high sheen, reflecting Kwon Ji-hoon's image back at him from every surface. The Jomun Taeyong, the Black Sun Syndicate, was hosting its annual gala for its most valuable legitimate partners. The event was held in the grand ballroom of the Dynasty Tower, a skyscraper Ji-hoon's construction firm had erected, a glass and steel monument to his own power piercing the Seoul skyline. The air was thick with the scent of money, of expensive perfume mingling with the faint, clean aroma of lilies flown in from Jeju Island. Light from a dozen crystal chandeliers fractured across the room, catching on diamond earrings and the faces of politicians, bankers, and shipping magnates. Ji-hoon moved through the crowd with an easy, predatory grace. He was a man in his element, a king in his court. His suit was bespoke, a dark charcoal wool that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His smile was a carefully calibrated instrument, deployed to charm, to disarm, to assert. He accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter without breaking conversation with a vice minister of finance, his mind effortlessly cataloging the man's weaknesses, the subtle tells of his greed. He performed his role with flawless competence. He was Kwon Ji-hoon, the modern face of an old power, the man who had dragged his father's gritty organization into the gleaming corporate 21st century. He saw his wife, Min So-yeon, only once that evening. She was standing near the edge of the room, partially obscured by a marble column. She was wearing a simple dark blue dress, elegant but deliberately unadorned. It did not hide the soft, generous lines of her figure, a figure that the wives of his partners, with their surgically sharpened angles, would have called plus size. Ji-hoon had long ago filed her physical presence under the category of unfortunate but manageable. She was not a trophy, So he had made her invisible. She was speaking to no one. Her hands were clasped loosely in front of her, and her gaze was not on the glittering crowd, but on the vast cityscape visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She seemed entirely self-contained, an island of stillness in the swirling sea of ambition. For a brief, fleeting moment, Ji-hoon felt a prick of something, annoyance perhaps. She was meant to be a part of the performance, a smiling, silent accessory at his side. Instead, she was observing, paying attention to the wrong things. He made a mental note to have his secretary remind her of her duties before the next event. Then he turned back to the vice minister, the thought of her vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. He was managing his world. He had no time for trivialities. He did not see the way her eyes, when they did drift back to the room, were not looking at the powerful men, but at their aides. He did not see her notice which junior analyst from the bank was speaking too earnestly to his right-hand man, Park Tae-woo. He did not register the subtle shift in her posture when Tae-woo placed a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder, a gesture of unnerving intimacy. He did not see her, and so he saw nothing of consequence at all. He was looking at the grand house he had built, admiring its facade, while she was staring at the cracks forming in its foundation. The foundation he had never bothered to inspect. He left the gala late, flushed with success and the easy affirmations of powerful men. He returned to their sprawling penthouse apartment alone. So-yeon, as was her custom, had departed hours earlier, slipping away without a word. A silent retreat he had always interpreted as a tacit acknowledgement of her own social irrelevance. It suited him. Her presence required a kind of energy he preferred to conserve for more important matters. The apartment was quiet, the air cool and still. He loosened his tie, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and stood before the same view she had watched from the ballroom. The city lights spread out below him, a glittering testament to his dominion. He felt the familiar, satisfying hum of control. Everything was in its place. He slept the dreamless sleep of a man who believes he has mastered his universe. He did not know that less than 100 meters away, in her own wing of the vast apartment, Min So-yeon was not sleeping. She was packing. Not with the frantic energy of escape, but with the calm, methodical precision of a librarian archiving a collection. A single suitcase contained her clothes. The rest were boxes. Books on maritime law, corporate ethics, and game theory. Financial records. A small framed photograph of her father. Each item was placed with deliberation. The process was quiet, efficient, and final. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the sky over Seoul, she was gone. The only trace of her existence was the profound, unnerving emptiness she left behind. The first indication that something was wrong came not as a dramatic revelation, but as a series of minor, irritating disruptions. Ji-hoon woke late the next morning, the whiskey leaving a dull throb behind his eyes. He expected to find a light breakfast laid out for him in the dining room, as it had been every morning for 7 years. A simple meal of rice, soup, and kimchi, the kind of home-style food he secretly preferred to the elaborate cuisine of his public life. So-yeon, for all her social awkwardness, had always understood this. It was one of the few functions she performed to his satisfaction. But the dining table was bare, polished to a mirror shine. The kitchen was dark and silent. He felt a familiar surge of irritation. It was an inefficient start to the day. He called her name, the sound swallowed by the cavernous space. No reply. He checked her suite of rooms. The bed was perfectly made, the surfaces clear. It was cleaner, emptier than usual. He noticed her closets were open, and inside they were barren. A few forgotten hangers, the scent of cedar and lavender, faint and fading. His first thought was not of alarm, but of pique. He assumed she had gone to visit her family in the countryside, a trip she sometimes took. But she always informed his household manager. To leave without notice was a breach of protocol. It was a petty, passive-aggressive gesture, and he resented it. He made a mental note to correct this behavior upon her return. He was a man who prized order, and this was a disruption of his domestic system. He showered, dressed, and left for his office, dismissing the matter from his mind. The empire awaited his attention. The second disruption came at 10 a.m., a call from his logistics chief. A major shipping partner, a Greek tycoon who controlled a fleet of container ships crucial to the Black Sun's European routes, had abruptly canceled their contract. No reason was given, just a terse email citing a fundamental reassessment of risk. Ji-hoon slammed the phone down. It was a multi-billion won contract. Losing it was more than an inconvenience. It was a blow to their prestige. He ordered his people to get the Greek on the phone. He would fix it. He always fixed it. The third disruption arrived an hour later. The president of a major domestic bank, a man Ji-hoon had cultivated for years, called personally. A previously approved line of credit, essential for a new real estate development in Incheon, was being put on indefinite hold. Concerns have been raised, Kwon-sang, the banker said, his voice slick with false regret. Regarding the stability of your collateral, an internal review is required. Ji-hoon's blood ran cold. Stability? His organization was a rock. This made no sense. He felt a strange, unnerving sensation, like the floor tilting beneath his feet. He spent the rest of the day in a flurry of calls, his voice growing sharper, his commands more urgent. He was met with a wall of polite, impenetrable excuses, evasions, delays. It was as if his entire network, the intricate web of obligations and threats he had so carefully woven, had been unplugged from its power source. His right-hand man, Park Tae-woo, was a portrait of calm capability through it all. Tae-woo, ever the loyal soldier, stood in Ji-hoon's office, fielding calls, gathering intelligence, his face a mask of controlled concern. "It's coordinated, Hyungnim," he said, using the respectful term for an older brother. "Someone is making a move against us. We need to find the source." Ji-hoon agreed, pacing his office like a caged tiger. He trusted Tae-woo implicitly. Tae-woo had been with him since the beginning, the sharp, silent instrument of his will. If anyone could get to the bottom of this, it was him. The cascade continued. By the end of the day, 3 more partners had withdrawn from major projects. A friendly contact inside the National Police Agency went dark, his encrypted messages suddenly unanswered. The world Ji-hoon had commanded was shrinking by the hour. He felt a rising sense of fury, of bewilderment. He was being attacked, but he couldn't see the enemy. The blows were landing from all directions, silent and precise, aimed at the load-bearing columns of his empire. He returned to the penthouse late that night, exhausted and unnerved. The apartment was still silent, still empty. The polished surfaces seemed to mock him with their cold indifference. Her absence, which had been a minor annoyance that morning, now felt like a physical presence, a void. He walked through her rooms again, this time more slowly. He began to notice things he had overlooked. The empty bookshelves were not just empty. The specific titles he could recall seeing there, books on economic theory, on international law, on moral philosophy, were all gone. A heavy leather-bound volume on the history of the Go game was missing from its usual place on her bedside table. In her study, a small sunlit room he had entered perhaps 3 times in 7 years, he saw that the corkboard on her wall was bare. It had once been covered in a complex web of notes, articles, and diagrams that he had dismissed as a housewife's idle hobby. Now there was nothing but pinholes. He ran his hand over the empty board. For the first time, a genuine, chilling fear began to snake its way into his heart. This wasn't a trip to the country. This wasn't a petty protest. This was a planned withdrawal, a strategic retreat. The full weight of his discovery did not land until the following morning. He had slept poorly, his mind racing, trying to connect the collapsing alliances outside with the silent, empty space inside his home. He woke with the sun, the solution no clearer than before. Driven by an impulse he didn't understand, he went back to her study. In the cool morning light, the room felt less like an absence and more like a meticulously prepared piece of evidence. He began to look not for what was gone, but for what remained. There was almost nothing. No stray papers, no forgotten trinkets, no personal effects. It was a level of cleanliness that was unnatural. It was the work of someone erasing themselves. Then he saw it. On the low table in the center of the room, where she used to drink her morning tea, sat a single object, a Go board. It was an old board, the wood worn smooth with use, the grid lines faded. It had been her father's. On the board, there was a single stone, a white stone, placed not on an intersection as it should be, but in the precise center of a square in the upper right quadrant. An impossible move. A violation of the game's most fundamental rule. He stared at the stone. It was a message. He knew it instantly. Go was a game of territory, of influence, of silent strategic encirclement. It was a game he played well. But this was something else. It was a signal. It was a problem statement. It was a challenge from a player who refused to play by the established rules. His mind, trained to see patterns and threats, began to work. The impossible move, the empty shelves, the coordinated financial attacks. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture that was both terrifying and, in its own way, brilliant. Soyeon had not just left him. She had dismantled the invisible architecture of his power as she went. The Greek tycoon, the cautious banker, the silent politician, he had always assumed their loyalty was to him, to the Black Sun. A chilling realization dawned. What if their loyalty had been to her? To her quiet competence, her steady hand, her reputation for integrity, that she had somehow cultivated in the shadows of his own aggressive expansion. He had seen her as a domestic manager, a quiet, unassuming wife, a plus-size woman who was good at running a household and staying out of the way. He had never once considered that she was operating on a level he couldn't even perceive, that she was the one managing the trust and goodwill that he had merely spent. The 72-hour mark was approaching. He was sitting in his office, the Go board now in front of him, the single white stone a silent accusation. His empire was in freefall. His men were scrambling, directionless. Taewoo was at his side, projecting an aura of grim resolve. We will find who is behind this, young Nim. We will strike back. Ji-hoon barely heard him. He was thinking about his wedding day, 7 years ago. An arranged marriage, a strategic alliance between his family and hers. Her father, Min Jun-ho, had been his own father's most trusted advisor, the brains of the old organization, a man of legendary wisdom and foresight. Ji-hoon had been 25, arrogant, eager to prove he was his own man. He had met Soyeon only twice before the ceremony. He remembered a quiet, shy girl of 22, with intelligent eyes and a soft, full figure. He had been unimpressed. He had seen a duty, not a partner. He had seen a name to be acquired, not a mind to be consulted. Her father had taken him aside just before the wedding. The old man was already frail, his health failing. He had gripped Ji-hoon's arm with surprising strength. You are a builder, Ji-hoon, he had said, his voice a low rasp. You build things that are loud and tall, but do not mistake the skyscraper for the bedrock. Pay attention to her. She is not like you. She sees the things that hold the world together. Ji-hoon had nodded, a gesture of polite dismissal. He had thought it was just the sentimental rambling of a dying man. He hadn't understood. He hadn't paid attention. And now the Oyabun's call came through, the final piece of the puzzle, the confirmation of his catastrophic failure. He hung up the phone, the 7 words, "She is the only one who listens," echoing in the silent room. He looked at Tae-woo, then at the go board. For the first time in his life, Kwon Ji-hoon, the master of his universe, felt utterly, hopelessly lost. The house was collapsing, the foundation was gone, and he finally understood that to save his house, he first had to find the woman who had built it. The chase was on. The first step was to understand the map. The go board was not just a symbol, it was a set of coordinates. Ji-hoon was a man of action, of direct force, but he knew this was not a problem he could solve with violence. This was a different kind of game, one played on her terms. He dismissed Tae-woo, needing space to think, a rare admission of uncertainty. Tae-woo's expression was one of perfect, subordinate understanding. But for the first time, Ji-hoon detected something else in his eyes. A flicker of something, watchful. He filed it away. He spent an hour with the board. The stone was placed on the 16th row, the 4th line from the right. In Go, this is the San Ren Se opening area, a move of influence. But the placement within the square, not on the intersection, was the key. It was a cipher. He pulled up a satellite map of Seoul on the large screen in his office. He cross-referenced the coordinates with district maps, architectural grids, anything he could think of. It was a dead end. The logic was wrong. He forced himself to stop thinking like Kwon Ji-hoon. He had to think like her. What did she value? Not power, not territory in the physical sense. She valued principles, order, the rules of a system. The stone was a violation of the rules. Where does one go to address a violation of rules? A lawyer. The thought struck him with the force of a physical blow. Her father's old law firm. It was located in the Socho district, an area famous for its legal offices. He looked at the map again. The 16th block, the 4th building. It matched. He felt a surge of adrenaline, the hunter's thrill of finding the trail. He was still in the game. He didn't take his usual convoy of black sedans. He took a single, unremarkable car, driving himself. The streets of Seoul, usually a landscape he owned, felt alien. He was moving through them not as a king, but as a supplicant. He found the building, a modest, older structure of granite and glass, dwarfed by the newer, flashier towers around it. The firm's name was etched on a simple brass plaque. Chon and Min. Min, her father's name. The receptionist, an elderly woman who looked like she had been there since the firm's founding, did not seem surprised to see him. She led him not to a meeting room, but to a small private library. "He is waiting for you," she said simply. The man waiting was not a partner. He was the firm's archivist, a man named Mr. No, with thin, wire-rimmed glasses and a stoop in his shoulders from decades spent over dusty legal texts. He was the first of the custodians. "Kwan-si," Mr. No said, bowing slightly. He gestured to a chair. "I was told to expect you." "You've spoken to her?" Ji-hoon asked, his voice tight. "I have not," the archivist replied calmly. "I received a delivery yesterday, a set of instructions, and this." He pushed a thick, sealed manila envelope across the polished table. "My instructions were to give this to you, and only you, once you arrived." She was quite specific about how you would identify yourself. "How?" Ji-hoon asked, frowning. "By not bringing your army," Mr. No said, a faint, dry smile touching his lips. "She said you would understand that this was a private matter." Ji-hoon felt a flush of something that might have been shame. She had anticipated his every move, his every thought. She was not just ahead of him, she was teaching him. He opened the envelope. Inside was not a letter, but a single, high-resolution photograph. It was a picture of a small, intricately carved wooden box, and beneath it, a short typed note. 7 years ago, you acquired a company called Heijin Logistics. You believed it was a simple acquisition to expand your port operations. It was not. Heijin was on the verge of bankruptcy due to a predatory corporate raid by a shell company. She spent 3 months working through this firm, structuring a bailout that looked like a takeover. She saved 400 jobs and the pensions of every employee. She did it without your knowledge, using her own inheritance to finance the initial legal challenges. She did it because their CEO was an old friend of her father's, and she had given her father her word that she would look after his people. She kept her promise. You, in your haste, almost destroyed it. Mr. No's voice was flat, without judgment, as he read the note over Ji-hoon's shoulder. Ji-hoon stared at the words. He remembered Heijin Logistics. He had seen it as a bargain, a weak company ripe for the picking. Taewoo had brought him the deal, presenting it as a strategic masterstroke. He had taken the credit without a second thought. He had never once looked into the details, the human cost. He had only seen the numbers. She was the one who listened, he murmured, the Oyabun's words coming back to him. Mr. No nodded slowly. She paid attention to the promises you forgot you had made, or the ones you never knew were made on your behalf. The trust your partners have withdrawn? It was never in your name, Kwan-si. It was in hers. She was the guarantor. Ji-hoon's hands clenched into fists. This was the first lesson, the first revelation of his own staggering ignorance. He looked at the photograph of the wooden box. What is this? Where do I find it? That is the next part of the trail, Mr. No said. He handed Ji-hoon a small, folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from an art gallery in Insadong. The box is an antique. It was being held for restoration. She instructed me to tell you one more thing. A foundation is not a floor. You can walk on a floor without thinking. A foundation requires respect. He left the law office, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. He had been so proud of his empire, his house. He was just now beginning to understand that he had been living in it like a tenant, oblivious to the architect who designed it, the engineer who maintained it, and the bedrock on which it stood. He drove towards Insadong, the heart of Seoul's traditional art and culture district, a place he hadn't visited in years. He was following her trail, and with each step, he was walking deeper into the unknown territory of his own life. Insadong was a world away from the cold, corporate geometry of Gangnam. The narrow streets were crowded with tourists and locals, the air filled with the smells of street food and old paper. Ji-hoon, in his severe, expensive suit, felt conspicuous and out of place. He found the gallery tucked away in a small alley, its entrance marked by a simple wooden sign. It was a quiet, serene space, filled with ancient pottery and delicate ink paintings. The gallery owner, a woman in her 60s with an artist's intelligent eyes and hands stained with what looked like clay, was the second custodian. Her name was Master Kim. She recognized him immediately, but her expression was one of cool, professional neutrality. "I have something for you," she said, her voice soft but firm. She led him to a back room, a workshop filled with tools for restoring ceramics and scrolls. On a velvet cloth sat the wooden box from the photograph. It was small, made of dark, polished persimmon wood, and intricately carved with symbols of longevity and wisdom. "She brought this to me a month ago," Master Kim explained, her eyes fixed on the box. "She said it needed to be cleaned, not restored, just cleaned. She said a great deal of dust had settled on it." Ji-hoon understood the metaphor. He reached for the box, but Master Kim held up a hand. "Before you take it, she asked me to tell you a story. She gestured for him to sit. Reluctantly, he did. 2 years ago, she began, there was a fire at one of your warehouses down by the port. A small fire, quickly contained. It barely made the news. Ji-hoon remembered it. An electrical fault, Tae-woo had reported. Minor damage, no injuries, a footnote in his operational history. It was not an electrical fault, Master Kim said, her gaze unwavering. It was arson. It was set by a young man, a dock worker. His family was in debt to a loan shark, one of your less formal competitors. They were threatening his younger sister. He was desperate. He was paid to set the fire as a warning to you. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. This was a direct challenge to his authority he had known nothing about. Tae-woo should have handled it. The man should have been made an example of. Your people identified him within hours, Master Kim continued, as if reading his thoughts. The standard response, I believe, would have been severe for him and his family. She paused, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air. But So-yeon found out. I do not know how. She came to me. She knew I ran a small, unofficial charity for families in the district. She gave me an envelope with enough cash to pay off the boy's entire debt, anonymously. And she gave me a message to pass to the rival organization through a channel I did not know I had. It was a message of peace, not war. An offer to mediate the dispute over territory, not escalate it. She looked at Ji-hoon, her expression searching. She told me that the boy was not an enemy. He was a symptom of a sickness. And you do not cure a sickness by killing the patient. You treat the cause. The debt was paid. The boy was quietly dismissed, not punished. The war did not happen. You lost a small amount of face. You saved a dozen lives. Ji-hoon sat in stunned silence. He had built his reputation on strength, on swift and brutal retaliation. An act of mercy like this, from his perspective, was an act of weakness. But she had seen it differently. She had seen a web of human lives, of desperation, of consequences. She had acted to protect the innocent, even when that innocent was technically an enemy. She had prevented a war he hadn't even known was coming. She paid for this, he said, his voice hoarse, gesturing around the gallery. My wife. She is your patron. Master Kim gave a small, sad smile. She is the patron of many things you do not see, Kwon-shi. She believes that true power is not the ability to break things, but the ability to hold them together. She slid the wooden box across the table. This is yours. Inside, you will find the next step. She said to tell you, an empty vessel makes the most noise. He took the box. It felt heavy in his hands, heavy with the weight of his own ignorance. He had thought himself a master of power, but he had only mastered its loudest, most brutish expression. She, in her silence, had wielded a power that was infinitely more subtle and profound. He opened the box. Inside, there was no note. There was only a single, dried lotus flower and a small, smooth, gray stone, the kind one finds on the floor of a mountain stream. It was another cipher, another piece of her quiet, devastating language. The lotus, a symbol of purity, rising from the mud. The mountain stone. He knew, instantly, where he had to go next. To the Myeogak Temple, a small remote monastery in the mountains of Gangwon Province, a place his father had revered, a place he himself had not visited since his father's funeral. He was being sent back to the source, to the very beginning of his own story. The trail was leading him not just to her, but back to himself. The drive to Gangwon Province took 3 hours. The sleek urban landscape of Seoul bled away, replaced by winding mountain roads and dense forests of pine and maple. The air grew cooler, cleaner. Ji-hoon drove in silence, the lotus flower and the river stone on the passenger seat beside him. With every kilometer that passed, he felt the artifice of his life stripping away. The tailored suit felt like a costume. The title of chairman felt like a mask. He was just a man, following a trail of breadcrumbs left by the wife he had never known. Myogak Temple was exactly as he remembered it. A collection of humble wooden buildings nestled in a curve of the mountainside, their tiled roofs the color of the evening sky. It was a place of profound stillness. The only sounds were the wind in the pines and the distant, rhythmic chanting of the monks. He felt a wave of nostalgia so sharp it was painful. He remembered coming here as a boy with his father, who would spend hours in silent meditation while Ji-hoon skipped stones in the nearby stream. His father had tried to teach him about stillness, about listening. He had been too impatient, too eager for the world of action and consequence. The abbot, a man named Master Daeho, was waiting for him on the steps of the main hall. He was ancient, his face a roadmap of deep wrinkles, but his eyes were clear and bright. He had been a close friend of Ji-hoon's father. He was the third custodian. "You have been away a long time, Ji-hoon," the abbot said, his voice gentle. He did not use Ji-hoon's formal title. Here, he was not the chairman. He was just the son of his friend. "She sent me," Ji-hoon said, holding out the lotus and the stone. The abbot nodded, unsurprised. "Soyeon has a deep understanding of the nature of things. She knew you would need to come here, to a place of quiet, before you could face the noise that is to come." He led Ji-hoon not to the temple's guest quarters, but to a small, isolated hermitage higher up the mountain. It was a single room with a paper-thin door and a view of the valley below. "She was here last week," the abbot said, pouring 2 cups of barley tea. "She did not speak of her troubles with you. She never does. She spoke only of her concern for the organization, for the families that depend on it. She said a sickness had taken root, and that to save the tree, one must sometimes prune a dying branch, even if it is close to the trunk." A dying branch close to the trunk. The word sent a chill down Ji-hoon's spine. He thought of Tae-woo, his brother in all but blood. It couldn't be. "She left this for you," the abbot said, handing him a small, simple key. It was a common low-tech key, the kind used for a padlock or a simple locker. "She said you would know where to find the lock. She also gave me a message for you. 13 words. Ji-hoon braced himself. The truths delivered by these custodians were like surgical strikes, precise and painful. She said, "The man who stands in your shadow is not always shielding you from the sun." The abbot's gaze was kind, but penetrating. "Your father saw your strength, Ji-hoon, your ambition, but he worried about your focus. He said you looked at the horizon so intently you did not see the ground at your own feet. Soyeon, she sees only the ground, every pebble, every root, every crack in the earth. Together, you were meant to be whole. A man who sees the destination, and a woman who ensures the path is safe to walk." The abbot stood up. "Stay here tonight. Meditate. The answer to where the key belongs will come to you in the silence. The city is a place of answers. The mountain is a place of questions. You have been living with the wrong answers for a long time. It is time to find the right questions." Ji-hoon spent the night in the hermitage. He did not meditate. He sat, staring out at the vast, dark valley, the key cold in his hand. He thought of Tae-woo, his loyalty, his efficiency, his constant presence at his side. He remembered the young bank analyst at the gala, speaking so earnestly to him. He remembered Tae-woo bringing him the Haejin logistics deal, perfectly packaged. He remembered Tae-woo's report on the warehouse fire, so clean, so simple. He remembered Tae-woo's calm, controlled face in his office as the empire began to crumble, urging him to strike back. The man who stands in your shadow is not always shielding you from the sun. The key, where did it fit? He thought of places he owned, of safes, of lockboxes. Nothing made sense. He had to think like her. Where would she store something vital? Something she wanted hidden, but accessible. Not in a place of power, in a place of humility. A place no one would ever think to look. A storage unit. A cheap, anonymous storage unit in some forgotten industrial park. He remembered signing paperwork years ago, a minor administrative task delegated by his finance department for the rental of several such units to store old paper records. He had dismissed it as trivial. He had signed the forms without reading them. She, he now realized, must have seen the opportunity. She had created a space for herself right under his nose, a space he had authorized but never acknowledged. And the key, the unit number. He looked at the key again. It was stamped with a small logo, a company he didn't recognize, and a number, B13. A simple, innocuous detail, but he knew what it was. It was the final piece of the map. He now had the location of her hidden archive, the place where she had stored the truth. And he had a sinking, terrifying feeling that the truth was going to be the loudest noise he had ever heard. He left the mountain at dawn, a cold resolve settling in his heart. The quiet lessons were over. He was about to unlock the storm. The industrial park was in a grim, forgotten corner of Gyeonggi Province, an hour's drive from Seoul. It was a sprawling, desolate place of corrugated metal and cracked asphalt, smelling of diesel and damp concrete. It was the last place on earth anyone would look for the secrets of the Black Sun Syndicate. It was perfect. Ji-hoon found the rental office, a shabby, portable building with a flickering fluorescent light. The manager, a bored-looking man chewing on a toothpick, barely glanced at him. Ji-hoon gave the unit number, B13. The man checked a grimy ledger and waved him through. Anonymity was the business model. Block B was at the far end of the complex. The row of metal garage doors seemed to stretch into infinity. He found number 13, a standard roll-up door secured with a heavy-duty padlock. The key slid in smoothly. He took a deep breath, the cold metal of the lock chilling his fingers, and turned it. The click of the mechanism echoed in the silence. He heaved the door upward. It groaned in protest, then rolled open, revealing the darkness within. He fumbled for a light switch just inside the door. The single bare bulb flickered on, casting a pale, sterile light. The unit was not large, perhaps 3 meters by 5, and it was not filled with clutter. It was organized with the same meticulous, unnerving precision as her empty rooms. Along one wall were rows of gray, archival quality boxes, each one neatly labeled in her elegant, precise handwriting. Along the other wall stood a simple metal desk and a chair. On the desk was a laptop computer and a single, thick, black binder. This was the hidden archive. This was her real office, the place where she had paid attention. He walked first to the boxes. The labels were chillingly specific. Heijin Logistics, Original Debt Structure. Inagawa Kai Joint Venture, Trust Accounts. Warehouse Fire, Pier 7, Witness Statements. Internal Financial Leaks, 2018 to 2021. It was a library of his own ignorance. Every crisis she had averted, every betrayal she had uncovered, every act of quiet integrity she had performed was documented here, cross-referenced and filed away. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. His entire 7-year reign as chairman, a period he had viewed as a triumph of his own making, had been a lie. He had been the public face, the performer on the stage, while she, from this small, grim room, had been the writer, the director, and the producer of the entire show. He sat down at the desk. The laptop was password protected. Of course it was. He thought for a moment. He tried her birthday. Denied. Their anniversary. Denied. He stopped, closing his eyes. He had to think like her. What was the central principle of her world? What was the question she had been trying to get him to ask? He thought of the custodians, of their messages. He thought of her father. He typed a single word in Korean. Gicho. Foundation. The screen unlocked. The desktop was clean, containing only a single folder labeled, "For Your Eyes Only." Inside were dozens of files, encrypted audio recordings, scanned documents, spreadsheets that tracked financial transfers with terrifying clarity. But he didn't open the folder yet. His eyes were drawn to the black binder on the desk. It was heavy. He opened it. The first page was a timeline, beginning 3 years ago. It tracked dates, times, and locations. The second page was a network diagram, a web of names and shell corporations. At the center of the web, circled in red, was a name that made the air leave his lungs. Park Tae-woo. He spent the next 2 hours in that cold, silent room, turning the pages of the binder. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, and devastating. Tae-woo, his most trusted lieutenant, his shadow, his brother, had been betraying him for years. The binder laid it all out. The siphoning of funds into offshore accounts, disguised as operational expenses. The secret meetings with rival factions, promising them a more traditional leadership once Ji-hoon was out of the way. The sabotage of legitimate deals that Tae-woo had framed as the failures of others. The Haejin logistics deal? Tae-woo hadn't just brought him the opportunity. He had orchestrated the initial predatory raid himself through a shell company, hoping to acquire it for his own portfolio before So-yeon had unknowingly intervened. The warehouse fire? The binder contained a transcript of a recorded call. Tae-woo himself had hired the desperate young dock worker, intending for the fire to be much larger, a disaster that would destabilize Ji-hoon's control of the ports and make him look incompetent. So-yeon's quiet intervention had not just saved the boy, it had foiled Tae-woo's plan. Every failure Ji-hoon had been insulated from, every crisis he had never known, had been a failed attempt by Tae-woo to undermine him. And So-yeon had seen it all. She had been quietly counterpunching for years, patching the holes he drilled in the hull, rerouting the funds he stole, mending the alliances he tried to break. The final section of the binder detailed Tae-woo's endgame, a plan set in motion over a year ago, to create a cascade of failures so profound that the syndicate's captains would have no choice but to remove Ji-hoon. The current crisis, the withdrawal of partners, the frozen lines of credit, it was all Tae-woo's masterpiece. He had spent years cultivating secondary contacts within those partner organizations, feeding them misinformation, stoking their fears, all leading to this moment. He had been waiting for the perfect time to strike, and So-yeon's departure had been the trigger. Tae-woo had likely seen her leaving as the final piece falling into place. With her gone, the true guarantor of trust was removed. The network was vulnerable. Tae-woo had immediately activated his plan, thinking Ji-hoon would be isolated and helpless. The helpful calls, the grim-faced loyalty in Ji-hoon's office, it was all a performance. He wasn't trying to help Ji-hoon find the enemy. He was managing the crisis he himself had created, ensuring it did the maximum possible damage. Ji-hoon closed the binder, his hands trembling slightly. The betrayal was so complete, so profound, it was almost elegant. He felt a surge of white-hot rage, a primal urge to find Tae-woo and tear him apart with his bare hands. But then, another feeling washed over him, something colder and heavier, a deep, soul-crushing shame. Soyeon had tried to warn him, not in words perhaps, but in her actions, in her quiet observations. He remembered the gala, her eyes on Tae-woo. She had seen it. She had probably been seeing it for years. She had tried to protect him, to protect the organization, from the sickness in his own house. And he had been too blind, too arrogant, too consumed with his own performance of power to notice. He had failed her. He had failed his father. He had failed the hundreds of families whose livelihoods depended on him. He looked at the laptop, the folder still open. He knew that inside it was the final destination on this trail, the place where she had gone. She had not run from the crisis. She had positioned herself at the end of the game, waiting to see which version of him would arrive, the humbled man or the broken one. She had left him a choice, to continue to be the king of a collapsing house of cards, or to finally, after all these years, see the foundation and begin the real work of building something that would last. He opened a file named Coordinates. It contained a single line of text, a GPS location. A small, unremarkable town on the East Coast. A place known for its quiet beaches and its fishing fleet. She wasn't hiding in a fortress. She was waiting in a place of peace. He stood up, leaving the archive exactly as he had found it. He had the truth. He had the target. And now, he had to face the architect. He walked out of the storage unit into the flat, gray light of the afternoon. A different man than the one who had entered. The rage was still there, a cold, hard knot in his chest. But it was tempered by a new, unfamiliar clarity. He finally saw the whole board, and he knew his next move. The seaside town of Muko was a study in faded glory. Once a bustling port for coal and cement, it had settled into a quiet, forgotten rhythm, its fortunes tied to the seasonal whims of squid fishing and coastal tourism. The salt-laced air carried the scent of drying fish and the sea. It was a place where time moved differently, measured in tides rather than minutes. It was the perfect place to disappear. Or to wait. Ji-hoon's arrival was anything but subtle. He had driven himself from the storage facility, but he had made one call. To a man known only as the Ghost. A loyal operator who worked outside the formal structure of the Black Sun. The Ghost was a master of logistics and discreet security, a man whose loyalty was to Ji-hoon's father's memory, not to the organization's shifting politics. The instructions had been simple: secure the town, but do not enter it. Be invisible, but be present. So as Ji-hoon's lone car rolled down the main street, a silent, invisible perimeter was already forming. Men in plain clothes, indistinguishable from fishermen or tourists, took up positions at the town's entry and exit points. A fishing trawler, freshly chartered and crewed by the Ghost people, sat in the harbor, its powerful communications array disguised as fishing equipment. It was the old way of doing things, a show of force so quiet it was almost imperceptible, but absolute in its intent. The convoy from the story's title wasn't a line of black sedans. It was this: the silent, total envelopment of a sleepy town, the power of the black sun descending like a change in the weather. The GPS coordinates led him to a small, unassuming house on a hill overlooking the harbor. It had a small garden in the front, filled with hardy coastal flowers, and a weathered wooden porch. It was the kind of house a retired schoolteacher might live in. He parked the car and walked to the front door, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He felt like a stranger arriving to plead his case before a foreign queen. He didn't need to knock. The door opened before he reached it. Min So-yeon stood in the doorway. She was not as he had pictured her. He had half expected to find her diminished, anxious, hiding. Instead, she looked rested. She was wearing simple linen trousers and a loose-fitting cotton shirt. Her hair was tied back, and her face was free of makeup. The sea air had brought a touch of color to her cheeks. She looked younger, more solid, more real than he had ever seen her in their sterile penthouse. The label he had put on her, plus size, seemed absurdly reductive here. She was simply herself, occupying her own space with a quiet, unshakable confidence. She was not a maid, or a wife, or an asset. She was Min So-yeon. "You found the archive," she said. It was not a question. Her voice was calm, even. It held no anger, no triumph, only a deep, resonant stillness. "I did," he said, his own voice sounding rough to his ears. She stepped back, holding the door open. "Then you should come in. We have things to discuss." The inside of the house was as simple and clean as the outside. It was filled with books and the light from the sea. She led him to a small living room with 2 comfortable armchairs facing a large window that looked out over the water. She moved with an economy of motion he had mistaken for timidity for 7 years. He now saw it for what it was: efficiency, purpose. She did not offer him tea. She sat in one of the chairs and waited for him to take the other. The power dynamic in the room was palpable. Here, in this small house, he was the visitor. He was the one who had been summoned. "Taewoo," he said, the name tasting like poison. "All of it." "Yes," she said. "For almost 4 years, he has been building a second, hidden structure within our own. A parasite. I began to suspect when I noticed small discrepancies in the household accounts. Trivial amounts, but the pattern was too regular, so I started paying attention." Attention. That word again. The thing he had withheld, the thing she had given so freely. "I used my own inheritance, the money my father left me, to hire a private forensic accountant," she continued, her voice as calm as if she were discussing the weather. "A woman in Switzerland, no connection to us. She confirmed the first few transfers. That led me to the shell corporations, to the meetings, to the plan. He is not just greedy, Ji-hoon. He is a true believer. He believes you are weak, that your focus on legitimacy has diluted the organization's strength. He wants to take it back to the old ways, to your grandfather's time, brutality and fear." Ji-hoon stared at her. "Why didn't you tell me? Why go through this elaborate game?" For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. It was not anger, but a profound, weary sadness. "Tell you?" she asked, her voice dropping slightly. "When was I meant to tell you? Between your meetings? Should I have left a note on your pillow? For 7 years we have shared a roof, but we have not had a single conversation that was not about a schedule or a social obligation. You looked at me, but you never saw me. If I had come to you a year ago and said, 'Your brother is a traitor,' you would have dismissed it. You would have seen it as female hysteria, an emotional outburst. You would not have listened." The truth of her words struck him with physical force. She was right. He would have. He would have told her not to worry her pretty little head about it, that he and Taewoo would handle it. He would have managed her concern. "So I prepared," she said, her gaze returning to the calm surface of the sea. "I gathered the evidence. I built the archive. I created a fortress of truth that you could not dismiss. And I planned for 2 possibilities." "2 possibilities?" he asked. "Scenario 1, she said, turning her clear, steady gaze back to him. "The one we are in now. The crisis would force you to follow the trail I left. The trail would force you to see the truth about our life, about the organization, and about your own blindness. It would break you down, and, if you were the man my father believed you to be, you would be humbled enough to be rebuilt. You would come here, and we would face Taewoo together, as partners." "And scenario 2, he asked, his throat tight. "In scenario 2, she said, her voice turning cold as the deep sea. You would fail. You would rage and break things. You would see the crisis as an attack from an external enemy, and you would lash out, further isolating yourself. Tae-woo would use your rage to depose you. The captains would have followed him, and you would have lost everything. What would you have done then? In that case, she said, the archive, along with a full confession I have already prepared and signed, would have been anonymously delivered to the Chief Prosecutor's office at the Supreme Prosecutor's office. It would have destroyed the entire organization. Tae-woo, you, all of it. I would have burned the whole house down. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The quiet, unassuming woman he had married was capable of a ruthlessness that rivaled his own. But her ruthlessness was not for personal gain. It was rooted in a terrifying, absolute set of principles. Why? He whispered. Why burn it all down? Because my father did not help your father build a criminal gang, she said, her voice ringing with a sudden, fierce power. They built a community, a flawed, dangerous community, but one with rules, with honor. It provided for thousands of families. It had a code. Tae-woo's vision would turn it into a cancer. I would rather destroy it than let it become that. It was my final duty to my father's memory. She leaned forward slightly. So, the question, Ji-hoon, is which man are you? The one who arrived at this door, or the one who would have let the world burn around him? He had no answer. He only knew that the woman sitting before him was the most formidable person he had ever met. His partner, his equal, the foundation he had never seen. What's your plan? He asked. The question an admission of defeat and a plea for guidance. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Not my plan, Ji-hoon, she said. Our plan. And it's already in motion. Tae-woo thinks he is playing chess. We are about to change the game entirely. The plan, as So-yeon laid it out, was not about force but about jurisdiction. It was a weapon Ji-hoon had rarely used, preferring the swift, clean lines of direct action. She, on the other hand, had mastered it. Tae-woo expects a war in the shadows, she explained, her voice crisp and clear. She was no longer the distant wife or the sad truth-teller. She was a field marshal briefing her commander. He expects you to try to rally the captains, to use the ghost to find and eliminate his key supporters. He is prepared for that. He would win that fight, because he has spent years sowing doubt about your leadership. So we fight differently, Ji-hoon said, catching on. The strategic part of his brain, long dormant in the fog of his arrogance, was finally waking up. We don't fight him at all, she corrected. We make him irrelevant. The evidence in the archive is clean. It's not the word of one gangster against another. It's financial records. It's notarized statements from third parties. It's legal. We are not going to the captains. We are going to the regulators. She laid out the three fronts of their counterattack. First, the financial crimes. The evidence of Tae-woo's embezzlement and the shell corporations would be filed not with the police, but with the Financial Supervisory Service, the national financial regulator. Tae-woo could bribe a cop or intimidate a prosecutor, but he couldn't make a multi-agency federal investigation disappear. It would immediately trigger a freeze on all assets connected to the shell companies, cutting off his funding. Second, the international front. The evidence related to the Inagawa Kai and the Vladivostok port would be sent directly to the Oyabun in Tokyo, but with a crucial addition: a formal request for arbitration under the terms of their joint venture agreement, an agreement she had personally drafted years ago. The Oyabun is a man of honor, she said. He will be furious that Tae-woo used him as a pawn. He will not just reinstate the partnership, he will actively assist in isolating Tae-woo from any international support. Third, and most importantly, the moral front. Taewoo's power within the organization comes from the perception that he is the true heir to the old ways, she said. That he has the strength you lack. We need to show the captains that his strength is just reckless self-interest that endangers everyone. This was where Ji-hoon came in. While she activated the legal and international machinery through her own quiet networks, he had to get on the phone. He had to call the key syndicate captains, the wavering allies who were likely already receiving overtures from Taewoo. But you cannot command them, she warned, her eyes locking onto his. You cannot threaten them. You have to do something you have never done before. You have to be honest. Admit your blindness. Tell them you failed to see the traitor in your own house. Tell them you allowed your focus on the legitimate world to make you lose sight of the health of the family. Ask for their patience, not their loyalty. Present them with a choice, a messy, bloody internal war with Taewoo, or a clean, surgical removal that protects the organization from outside scrutiny. It was a humbling strategy. It required him to sacrifice his pride, the very thing he had guarded so fiercely. It was her way of thinking, not his. It was about building consensus, not demanding obedience. As if on cue, Ji-hoon's encrypted phone buzzed. It was a message from the ghost. Movement. Taewoo has called an emergency council of the captains, midnight tonight, at the old fish market. He's making his move. The clock was ticking. Taewoo, realizing he was exposed, or perhaps just believing Ji-hoon was too weak to respond, had decided to accelerate his endgame. He was going for a direct seizure of power. He's forcing our hand, Ji-hoon said, showing her the message. No, she replied calmly, a flicker of steel in her eyes. He's walking into our trap. He thinks the game is decided tonight in that market. But the game will already be over. He just won't know it yet. The next few hours were a blur of controlled, intense activity. The small house on the hill became a war room. So-yeon, using a laptop and a satellite phone provided by the Ghost team, began her work. She moved with a silent, focused intensity, her fingers flying across the keyboard, her voice low and steady as she spoke with her contacts in law and finance. She was a master of a world Ji-hoon had never even known existed, a world of clauses, jurisdictions, and procedural maneuvers. His job was harder. He had to make the calls. He started with the most important and most skeptical of the captains, a man named An, who controlled the lucrative private lending operations. An was old school, a man who respected strength above all else. Ji-hoon took a deep breath, So-yeon's words echoing in his mind. Be honest. Captain An, he began, his voice steady. It is Kwon Ji-hoon. I am calling you not as your chairman, but as the son of the man you served with for 30 years. I have failed. I have allowed a traitor to grow in our midst, and his name is Park Taewoo. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Taewoo contacted me an hour ago, An said, his voice a low growl. He says you have lost control, that our partners are abandoning us because you are weak. He is half right, Ji-hoon said, the admission tasting like ash. I was weak. I was blind. I did not pay attention to my own house. But the partners are leaving because of Taewoo's treachery, which he is now blaming on me. He created the fire, and now he is offering to sell us water. He spent the next 10 minutes laying out the truth, not as a command, but as a confession. He didn't share all the details of the evidence, only the nature of the betrayal. He explained the choice they faced, a bloody civil war that would attract the attention of the authorities and destroy everything they had built, or a quiet, surgical removal of a cancer. Taewoo offers you a return to the past, Ji-hoon said, his voice raw with a sincerity he hadn't felt in years. I am offering you a future, one that will be harder, that will require more discipline, but it will be stable, it will be secure, and it will be built on truth, not on lies. I am asking for your trust, not for tonight, but for the next 90 days. Give me that time to prove I am worthy of my father's name. If I fail, the chairmanship is yours to give to whomever you choose. It was an unprecedented offer. He was making himself accountable. He was giving away power, not hoarding it. He was treating a subordinate as a partner. He was using her methods. He made 3 more calls to other key captains, each conversation following the same painful, humbling script. He did not know if it was working. He was operating on faith in her strategy. As the hours ticked down toward midnight, the first results of Soyeon's work began to come in. A contact within the FSS sent a discreet, one-word message. Frozen. Taewoo's financial arteries were severed. Shortly after, a call came through from Tokyo. It was the Oyabun's chief advisor. His voice was cold with fury. The Oyabun sends his regards, the advisor said, and his apologies for misjudging the situation. He considers the actions of Park Tae-woo a personal insult. Any of your captains who side with him will find that the world has suddenly become a very small and very cold place for them. The pieces were in place. Tae-woo was walking into the fish market to claim a throne that had already been dismantled from beneath him. He was a king with no treasury and no allies. He just didn't know it yet. It's time, Soyeon said, closing her laptop. She looked at Ji-hoon, her expression unreadable. He will be expecting you to show up at the market, either to fight or to surrender. You will do neither. What do I do? He asked. You wait, she said. Power, the kind you and Tae-woo understand, is a performance. It requires an audience. We are going to deny him his audience. She handed him his phone. He will call you. When he does, you will answer, and you will tell him where you are. Here, with you? Yes, she said. The greatest blow you can land on him right now is not with a fist, but with a fact. The fact that you are not alone. The fact that the foundation he thought was gone is right here, holding up the house. The call came at 5 minutes to midnight. Ji-hoon's phone rang, displaying Tae-woo's number. He looked at So-yeon. She nodded. He answered. Hyungnim. Tae-woo's voice was smooth, confident, laced with a predator's false sympathy. I am at the market. The captains are all here. They are concerned. They are waiting for you. It is time to end this, for the good of the family. Ji-hoon stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, churning sea. I am not coming, Tae-woo, he said, his voice calm. There was a pause, a flicker of surprise in Tae-woo's control. What are you doing? Hiding? It's over, Hyungnim. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm in Muko, Ji-hoon said simply. I'm with So-yeon. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Ji-hoon could almost hear the gears turning in Tae-woo's sharp, analytical mind. He could picture his face, the mask of control cracking as he processed this impossible piece of information. So-yeon was not just a runaway wife. She was with Ji-hoon. They were together. It meant the game he was playing was not the one he thought it was. She's a housewife, Hyungnim, Tae-woo said, but his voice had lost its edge. It was laced with a new, desperate uncertainty. What is she going to do? She's the one who listens, Ji-hoon replied, the words filling him with a strange, unfamiliar strength. He was not just repeating the Oyabun's phrase. He was finally understanding it. And she heard everything you were whispering in the shadows. He paused, letting the weight of the implication land. It's over, Taewoo. Your accounts are frozen. The Japanese have disavowed you. And the captains? The captains are about to receive a portfolio of your activities, courtesy of my wife. You have no money, no allies, and no credibility. You are a king with no kingdom. He could hear shouting in the background on Taewoo's end. The captains, likely receiving messages from their own people about the frozen assets, about the wrath of the Inagawa Kai. The council was dissolving into chaos. Taewoo's carefully constructed coup was evaporating before his eyes. "Where are you?" Taewoo snarled, the mask of civility gone completely, replaced by the raw fury of a cornered animal. "I'll kill you both!" "No, you won't," Ji-hoon said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You won't get within 100 kilometers of us. The ghost has you. It's over. Stay where you are. We will come for you." He hung up the phone. The room was silent, save for the sound of the wind and the sea. He looked at So-yeon. She was watching him, her head tilted slightly, a glimmer of something in her eyes he had never seen before. It might have been approval. It might have been hope. The antagonist had not just been countered. He had been collapsed, dismantled, piece by piece, by a quiet woman with a laptop and a man who was finally, after 7 years, learning to listen. The end for Park Tae-woo was swift and ignominious. The ghost's men, moving with silent efficiency, sealed the fish market. The captains, now fully aware of the depth of Tae-woo's betrayal and the precariousness of their own positions, melted away into the night, leaving him isolated and exposed. There was no gunfight, no dramatic confrontation. Tae-woo simply vanished from the scene, swallowed by the operational vacuum he had created for himself. 2 days later, the ghost located him. Not in a rival's fortified penthouse or a hidden safe house, but in a cheap, squalid motel on the outskirts of Ansan, a city known for its transient industrial population. His assets were frozen. His network of allies had dissolved into a chorus of denials, and his grand ambitions had been reduced to a single room that smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. The ghost sent the location to Ji-hoon, along with a simple message: "He is contained, awaiting your orders." The old Ji-hoon would have gone himself. He would have wanted to see the look in Tae-woo's eyes, to savor the victory, to mete out the brutal, personal justice the old ways demanded. He sat with the message for a long time, the urge for vengeance a hot, bitter taste in his mouth. So-yeon watched him, saying nothing. She did not advise him or judge him. She simply waited, allowing him the space to make his own choice. This was a test, perhaps the most important one. Would he revert to the man he had been, or would he continue on the new path? He thought of the young dock worker whose life she had saved. He thought of her words: "You do not cure a sickness by killing the patient." Tae-woo was a sickness, but another act of violence, another body buried in the mountains, would only perpetuate the cycle. It would prove Tae-woo's caricature of him right. He made a call, but it was not to the ghost. It was to the contact So-yeon had established within the Supreme Prosecutor's office. He gave them the location of the motel. He gave them the name of Park Tae-woo. And he gave them the access codes to a specific, firewalled section of the archive she had prepared, containing only the evidence of financial crimes, clean, prosecutable, and stripped of any connection to the wider organization. "He is an embezzler," Ji-hoon told the prosecutor. "A white-collar criminal who defrauded my company. Take him." It was a radical act. He was inviting the government into their world, a violation of the most sacred taboo. But he was doing it on his own terms, feeding them a contained, manageable piece of the truth. He was using the system to excise the cancer, cauterizing the wound with the clean fire of the law. It was her way. It was the new way. When he hung up, he looked at So-yeon. It's done, he said. She gave a single, slow nod. The tree has been pruned, she said softly. Now it has a chance to heal. The institutional restoration was faster and more complete than Ji-hoon could have imagined. With Tae-woo arrested on non-syndicate charges and the evidence of his broader treachery discreetly circulated among the captains by Captain An, the internal power struggle ceased to exist. The story that solidified was one of Ji-hoon's quiet brilliance, that he had allowed the traitor to expose himself before surgically removing him with minimal collateral damage. He received credit for a strategy that had been entirely So-yeon's. The external partners returned to the fold, one by one. The Oyabun, in a gesture of profound respect, flew to Seoul for a private meeting. He met not just with Ji-hoon, but with both of them. He spent most of the meeting speaking directly to So-yeon, discussing matters of trust and long-term strategy in a way he had never done with Ji-hoon. At the end of the meeting, the old man bowed to her, a gesture that sent a shockwave through the upper echelons of both organizations. The bankers, the politicians, the shipping magnates, they all came back. Their attitudes subtly changed. They now understood that the stability of the Black Sun was guaranteed not just by Kwon Ji-hoon's aggressive vision, but by Min So-yeon's quiet wisdom. They were a unit, two halves of a whole. A month after Tae-woo's arrest, Ji-hoon stood on a familiar stage. It was a different gala, a different set of partners, but the setting was the same. A high-rise ballroom, glittering with wealth and power, a testament to his world, now restored. He was expected to give a speech, a triumphant declaration of victory, a reassurance that the storm had passed. His communications team had prepared a script for him, full of confident platitudes and forward-looking statements. He walked to the podium, the script in his hand. He looked out at the sea of expectant faces. He saw the Vice Minister of Finance, the bank presidents, the captains of industry, and at the back of the room, near a marble column, he saw So-yeon. She was watching him, her expression calm and unreadable. She was giving him one last stage, one last test. He put the script down on the podium, untouched. "Good evening," he began, his voice quiet but clear, carrying through the silent room. "You all came here tonight expecting to hear that the House of the Black Sun is strong, that our foundations are secure. And they are. But not for the reasons you think, and not because of me." He paused, letting the murmurs ripple through the crowd. "For 7 years, I have stood before you as the leader of this organization. I have taken the credit for its successes, for its stability, for its growth. Tonight, I am here to correct the record. I have been the face of this house, but I was not its architect. I was not its foundation." He looked directly at the back of the room, his gaze finding his wife. "That honor belongs to one person, a person many of you have seen but never truly noticed. My wife, Min So-yeon." A wave of shock and confusion washed over the audience. People turned, trying to find her in the crowd. She did not move. She simply held his gaze. "The trust you placed in us," Ji-hoon continued, his voice ringing with the painful clarity of his confession. "You did not place it in me. You placed it in her integrity, in her wisdom. When our house was threatened, it was not my strength that saved it. It was her foresight. It was her courage. I was a man who saw the horizon, but I was blind to the ground at my feet. She was the one who ensured the path was safe, who tended to the foundations while I was admiring the view from the penthouse. I saw the house, but I never saw the foundation. Min So-yeon is the foundation." He picked up his glass of water. "From this day forward, any significant decision regarding the strategy, ethics, and partnerships of this organization will be made with her full authority and consent. She is not my advisor. She is my partner. In all things." He raised the glass. "To the foundation," he said, and drank. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was profound. It was the sound of a world recalibrating, of a truth landing with the force of a tectonic shift. Then, slowly, starting with the old Oyabun, the room rose to its feet. Not for him, but for her. A quiet, standing ovation for the invisible architect, now finally seen. Later that night, they were back in the penthouse. The vast, empty space felt different now. Less like a museum, more like a home waiting to be inhabited. The lights of Seoul glittered below, but the view no longer felt like a symbol of his dominion. It felt like a responsibility, a shared one. Soyeon was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He came to stand beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty as it had been before. It was full of everything that had happened and everything that was yet to be decided. "That was a good speech," she said finally, her voice soft. "It wasn't a speech," he replied. "It was the truth." He reached out, tentatively, and placed his hand over hers on the cool glass of the window. She did not pull away. Her hand was warm. "I know that what I did cannot be undone with a speech," he said, his voice low. "I know that trust is not a statue you build once. It's something else." "It's a garden," she said, turning to look at him, her eyes searching his. "You have to tend to it every day. You have to water it and pull the weeds and make sure it gets enough sun. For 7 years, you let my garden wither." "I want to learn how to garden," he said. The words simple, honest, a plea. She looked at him for a long moment, the city lights reflecting in her dark, intelligent eyes. He saw no triumph there, no gloating, only a clear, pragmatic assessment. He had passed the tests. He had chosen the right path. But the journey was far from over. This was not an ending. It was a beginning. A conditional, earned, unsentimental one. "All right, Ji-hoon," she said, her voice still quiet but with a new note of possibility in it. "Show me. Show me you can learn." She did not say she forgave him. She did not say she loved him. She did not promise him a happy ending. She offered him something far more valuable and far more real. A chance. A chance to build something new, together, not on the ruins of the old, but on a foundation that had finally, at great cost, been brought into the light. He turned his hand and laced his fingers through hers. It was the first time in 7 years he had truly held it. It felt like coming home.